So let us get on with our introduction. This morning, it's my pleasure to welcome Pádraig Tuama as our morning keynote. I was first introduced to Pádraig's work from a mutual friend, Steve Stopman, in Northern Ireland. And then a few months later, I heard a podcast from Pádraig posted on the Sojourner's website. A few things stood out to me in his presentation. First, he's an Irishman living in Belfast, which made me think of Chad, because the last time I went to Ireland, it was with Chad. Next, he is passionate about story, specifically narrative theology, which made me think of Chad, because he's doing his doctorate of ministry in narrative theology. And finally, he spoke about gay liberation theology, which made me think of this conference and Chad. Needless to say, when we discovered an Irish Catholic gay theologian poet, we had to ask him to come. So here we are, beyond blessed to have this creative poet, theologian, and peace worker from Cork. His published works are in Discovering the Spirit in the City, readings from the Book of Exile, which you must own if you don't, and Sorry for Your Troubles. Please welcome Pádraig Tuama.
Friends, it's a joy to be with you. Thank you for having me. In the Irish language, there's a proverb, ska chéile waras na daoine, and it translates as, it is in the shelter of each other that the people live. It is in the shelter of each other that the people live. And before I begin, I want to pay honor to the people who have created the shelter that we have here. We've already thanked everybody, the volunteers, the people who work in the chaplaincy, Chad, Sarah, and Lisa, and also the university that has a vision for creating a critical and public conversation for very important stories, very important theologies, and hearing the voice from the people whose voices need most to be heard. So I thank them for creating that shelter and honor them for this brave and prophetic work. So thank you very much to everybody who's involved. We'll begin in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. In the name of goodness and love and broken community, in the name of meaning and feeling, and I hope you don't screw me, in the name of darkness and light and unbreakable twilight, in the name of meal times and sharing and caring by firelight, in the name of action and peace and human redemption, in the name of eating and drinking and table confession, in the name of sadness, regret, and holy obsession, the holy name of anger, the spirit of aggression, in the name of forgive and forget, and I hope I get over this, in the name of Mother and Daughter and the unholy Spirit, in the name of beauty and broken and beaten up daily, in the name of seeing our creeds and believing in maybe, we gather here, a room full of strangers, to speak of our hopeland and talk of our danger, to make sense of our thinking, to authenticate lives, to humanize feeling and stop telling lies, in the name of philosophy and theology and who gives a damn, in the name of employment and study and finding new family, in the name of our passions, our longings and indecent obsessions, in the name of prayer and of worship and of demon possession, in the name of solitude and quiet and holy reflection, in the name of the lost and the lonely and the without direction, in the name of efficiency, stupidity, and the wholly ineffectual, in the name of the straight and the queer, the transgender and bisexual, in the name of boot clogs and boob jobs and erectile dysfunction, schizophrenia, hysteria, obsessive compulsion, in the name of Jesus and Mary and the mostly silent Joseph, in the name of speaking to ourselves, saying, this is more than I can cope with, and in the name of touch-up and break up and break down in weeping, in the name of therapy and Prozac and full-hearted breathing, in the name of sadness and madness and years since I've smiled, in the name of the unknown, the alien, and the holy in exile, in the name of goodness and kindness and intentionality, in the name of harbor and shelter and family. Amen. I used to be a school chaplain in Belfast. And as a school chaplain, I used to work with young people from the ages of 11 to 18 on day retreats. And during the context of their day retreats, I'd have around 8 young people from a classroom, and we would do a prayer imagination exercise in the tradition of St. Ignatius of Loyola, taking a walk and allowing yourself to be a character in the walk and meeting Jesus of Nazareth on the walk and talking to him and making space for him to hear back. It was a very light-hearted imagination. We used to say to people, this is just your imagination, so don't feel like you don't have to intensify this. Just go in your imagination, and maybe your imagination will surprise you. And it was an astonishing year of work. Every day I met Jesus of Nazareth from the imagination of West Belfast young people from the age of 11 to 18. It was wonderful. One young person said to me, well, I ignored everything that you said, and I just walked on the water. And as I was walking along the water, Jesus came along, except he was dressed a little bit strangely. He was wearing a purple tutu and a coconut bra. And usually I get the young people to draw out their image, which they then present back to their religious education teacher. And fortunately, the young person said to me, I'm not very good at drawing. And I was thinking, thank God, because I want to keep my job. One young fella, 11 years old, was taking a walk in his imagination with Jesus, and he said to me afterwards, he goes, I was walking along and Jesus comes up and says to me, hello, and he knew my name. That was always the imagination exercise. And then I said hello, back to Jesus, hello, and we were walking along and chatting, and I told him about school, and I told him about my friends, and I told him about my holidays, and it was a very general thing. And then there was a point when the young people could say anything they wanted to Jesus, anything at all, and they didn't have to share it afterwards, always. And so, but he shared it afterwards. He said, when I could say anything I wanted to Jesus, I looked at him and I said to him, how do I know you are who you say you are? It's Christologically perfect. The central question of the Synoptic Gospels. Who do you say that I am? How do I know that you are who you say you are? He's an 11-year-old boy, so I didn't want to intensify the experience. So I was like, all right, that's nice. Oh! Did he say anything back to you? And this is exactly what he said. He looked at me and he told me the story of my life. And I said, that's a lovely experience. And he went, yeah, can I color? I was like, of course you can. Here's the colors. He looked at me and he told me the story of my life. I've titled this talk today, Who Do You Say That I Am? To create a queer relationship between the central Christological questions of the Synoptic Gospel and the experience of LGBT people having our names given to us for a very long time. And I'm speaking to you, and I've chosen these words because I believe that there is good news for us. Very good news. That what is called itself good news has often been bad news, and bruising news, and terrible news, and not news at all. It's been olds, because we know it already. What we have to hear from the gospel and from Jesus of Nazareth, the crucified and living one who walks among us, who lives among us, living in the midst of our dying and dying in the midst of our living. What we have to hear from him is good news about what does it mean to be human, and what does it mean to be us? And what does it mean to be us together? And what does it mean to be us when people have taken our names from us? We have good news. So who have I said that I am? When I was 11, I didn't really know, well, who knows anything when you're 11, except that little boy who I mentioned. When I was 11, somebody on the playground in the boys' school that I went to found out that there was a word called homosexual and a word called homo sapien. And we all knew you were supposed to say yes to one and no to the other. And I'm terrible with east and west. And I'm terrible with objective and subjective. I can never tell the difference. And I'm terrible with love the sin and hate the sinner. I can never make sense of that one either, because it doesn't make sense. And I could never tell the difference as an 11-year-old boy with that trick question on the playground. Pádraig, are you a homosexual or a homo sapien? And one day, I thought I had it correct. And a boy came up to me from my class and said, Pádraig, are you a homosexual or a homo sapien? And with great pride, I went, I am a homosexual, confident that I had the careful and safe answer. The day unfolded to reveal to me that I did not have either the careful or the safe answer. When I was 12, it became clear to me who I was. You know, some people say, there's a spectrum. Not for me, there isn't. 100% gay. Check out the shoes. I know you've been checking them out already. But one of the things that I learned, when I learned and understood that I'm gay was, or I didn't even have that word, but I thought, I need to learn how to keep secrets. I need to learn how to lie. And then when I was 17, the Catechism of the Catholic Church was released in a new form. It was published in 1993 and released. And the term used was intrinsic moral disorder. And you can be guaranteed it was the first thing I looked up when I snuck the Catechism of the Catholic Church into my bedroom. Although it did say pastoral sensitivity must be exercised when treating people with this condition, which I think somebody thought was good news for somebody. But from this side of that good news, it was not good news. When I was 17 again, I waited. I lived in the countryside, but I waited until there was nobody in the house. There was 6 kids and my parents, so it was rare that there was nobody else in the house. But I waited until there was nobody else in the house, and I tried to say to myself, I am. And I remember the feeling in my throat. It was a physical feeling. It went from my throat to my chest. The weight of the word. I couldn't say it. And then the same year when I was 17, after I left school, I decided that I wasn't going to university. I didn't get the entry points for the course that I wanted to do. And I decided I'd take a year out and join a Christian missionary organization. And on the application form for the Christian missionary organization, it asked you your testimony and asked you what church you were involved with and asked you this, that, and the other. And then there was a little corner of the application form that said the following. Have you ever been involved with the following 4 tick boxes? Drug addiction, occultism, alcoholism, or homosexuality? If you tick any of these boxes, it will not necessarily exclude you from our programs. Please use the following 3 lines to explain to us your lifestyle. I closed the application form. A few months later, I had my first exorcism, which I am delighted to say was utterly unsuccessful. And then I began to adopt the term person who struggles with a homosexual orientation, because that's what I had been told. I'd read that. Somebody somewhere thought that was good news. And it lasted for a while, but ultimately my beginning point toward the world has always been that of a poet. Another way to say that sounds lovely and, oh wow, so artistic. Ultimately, it means I'm an absolute snob when it comes to words. And I started to read my own words as I used to write in my journal, a person who struggles with a homosexual orientation, and thought, that's ridiculous. I'm gay. Now, I can make my own choices about what I'm going to do about that. Do I wish to be in a relationship or not? It took me a long time to figure out what I wish to do, making a choice in my own integrity. But I thought, I'm not going to play around with stupid words, person who struggles with a homosexual orientation. It's just exhausting to say that. Now, Irish people love to use 10 words when we can use 2, but these were 10 bad words. They weren't good words. A friend of mine said to me, and it's only close friends can say this, because I did end up joining the missionary organization, and I stayed with them, and they still have that question on many of their international application forms. I stayed with them for 15 years, became reasonably senior in a evangelical, charismatic, worldwide missions organization. And a friend of mine very gently said to me at one point, who knew I was gay, might be an idea for you to find somebody professional to talk to. as a way to explore what's going on. Ultimately, she understood that I was fast-tracking my way towards a nervous breakdown, and she was correct. And I did find somebody. And it didn't stop the breakdown, but it helped me find a story. So here's a poem called Narrative Theology number 1. And it is in honor of Peter Saunders, the psychotherapist who I saw weekly for 3 years. Narrative Theology number 1. And I said to him, "Are there answers to all of this?" And he said, "The answer is in a story, and the story is being told." And I said, "But there is so much pain." And she answered plainly, "Pain will happen." Then I said, "Will I ever find meaning?" And they said, "You will find meaning where you give meaning." The answer is in a story, and the story isn't finished. During that time, I started to read a little bit of Ignatius of Loyola, a Basque man who had a deep conversion to Christianity, and he echoed a particular phrase from early in the Christian calendar, a phrase written by Irenaeus of Lyon. And the phrase is the following: "The glory of God is a human being fully alive." And previous to that, I think I thought of glory as something sparkly. I wasn't entirely sure what you did with that sparkliness, but something sparkly. Sparkly during the day, sparkly during the night, maybe a magnificent fountain or anything sparkly, loud, vivacious. And then I thought, I'm not particularly interested in sparkly anymore. I'm much more interested in what does it mean to be fully alive. And I began to pay a bit of attention to who do I see around me that's fully alive, and what is the possibility of being fully alive as a person who loves my faith, but is beginning to think, I can't use other people's words for me. These words are inadequate, and more than inadequate, dangerous. And so I began to dare to trespass upon the possibility of an imagination that there might be something to be said about an indigenous sense of what does it mean for me to be fully alive. It was an invitation to examine harsh borders in myself and an invitation to examine narrow binaries of the heteronormative environment in which I was. It was celebrating a little bit about recognizing that we're all a little bit queer, and that even people who seem to fit in really always have their own anxieties also. And so it's not about trying to be on the in-group. It's about thinking it's not about being in any group. It's about finding what does it mean to be fully alive with an indigenous integrity to the glory of God as God comes to me. So here's a poem I wrote called Creed. I wrote it much later, but really it was reflecting back. Creed. I once was blind, but now I can see. I once was him, but now I'm me. I once was cold, but now I'm not. I used to fear hell where the fire is hot. I wanted to be straight, but the thing is I'm queer. I thought I belonged there, but I belong here. I once was wrong because I thought I was right. I thought that the darkness was the same as the night, and I thought that the light was consoling and beautiful. All it asked was be pure and be right and be dutiful. But light can be insipid and daytime can be vacuous, and no cult is so crude as the cult of the miraculous. I thought that walking on the water would be the end of it all, but addiction to articulation was the start of my fall. I fell into meaninglessness, I fell into sin, I fell into darkness, and I felt caged in, and I fell into the arms of something that was lurking in the corners, in the shadows, and it's been slowly converting my methods and madness into myth and new meaning, my sagas and sadness given girth and given grieving, and now I believe in the God of the human, the good, the glorious, the generous and grooving. I once was blind, now I'm blinder still, and inside my own darkness I am silent and still. So I live and work in Belfast, and there's, I suppose, 3 prongs to my career. I work as a poet, I work as a theologian, and I work as a peace and conflict mediator, working with groups of people who've lived through the trauma of an environment that has suffered the latest round of 30 years of violence. Depending as to who you ask, our territory has been in tension either since 1968 or 1607. So, or there's a couple of dates in between there too. Sectarianism is the term, and I was intrigued to hear, did you call him Rock last night? Speak about sectarianism, and that this university here is a non-sectarian space. I thought it's wonderful for people to recognize the possibility of sectarianism in any human gathering, because it's a reality, not just for particular places of conflict, like Northern Ireland or Israel, Palestine or South Africa or different places. But Cecilia Clegg and Joe Lichty, in a book called Moving Beyond Sectarianism, defined various levels of sectarianism. To be sectarian can be to be trying to figure out, who are you? Because I need to fit you into a category that works for me. That's one level. It can seem fairly cuddly and cute, do you know? Are you, Justin mentioned that joke last night, are you this kind of a Baptist or that kind of a Baptist? We all do that. Trans people know what it's like to be colonized into people's understanding of gender and to people's understanding of what normative looks like. Cecilia Clegg and Joe Lichty, in their book Moving Beyond Sectarianism, point to a deep level of sectarianism, where it says, I will tell you who you are. And if you want to say who you are, I'll tell you you're wrong. Your categories are not true. What is true is my category for you. That is a deep level of sectarianism. We find that in various places around the world, not just in the north of Ireland. We find that when people say, well, I'm the right kind of Christian, and depending as to what your denomination is, well, you're not even a Christian. You're not even a patriot. You're not even faithful to our national narrative. We're all good at doing that. It isn't the territory solely of places of exceptional conflict like we've got. And I suppose the reason why I call this Who Do You Say That I Am is because we must always recognize that inasmuch as we have suffered ourselves as people who have had our words for ourselves defined, we're perfectly capable of doing that to other people. Some of the most misogynistic men I know are gay men. Some of the most transphobic people I know are people who are LGB. Some of the biphobia that we come across is astonishing. Some of the gender normative ideals that we hear come right from within the LGBT community. So the idea that just because we've suffered means that we are exempt from the possibility of passing that suffering on to anybody else, that's absolutely not true. It's self-deception, and it's dangerous self-deception. And the reason why I want critical dialogue between this question about words we use to define ourselves and others and the gospel is because I think Jesus of Nazareth was very attentive to questions used. Now, let me see if the technology is going to work. Hey. So we'll turn to Luke's gospel. Well, you don't have to turn to it. You're facing it already. I think this is the New Revised Translation that I've got up here. I'm reading to you from the Jerusalem version. One of the Pharisees invited him to a meal. When he arrived at the Pharisee's house and took his place at the table, suddenly a woman came in who had a bad name in the town. She had heard that he was dining with the Pharisee and brought with her an alabaster jar of ointment. She waited behind him at his feet, weeping, and her tears fell on his feet, and she wiped them away with her hair. Then she covered his feet with kisses and anointed them with ointment. When the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would know who this woman is and what sort of person it is who's touching him and what a bad name she has. And Jesus took him up and said to him, Simon, I have something to say to you. And he said, say on, Master. There was once a creditor who had 2 men in his debt. One owed him 500 denarii, the other 50. They were both unable to pay, so he let them both off. Which of them will love him more? Simon answered, the one who was let off more, I suppose. And Jesus said, you're right. Then he turned to the woman and said to Simon, do you see this woman? I came into your house and you poured no water over my feet, but she has poured out her tears over my feet and wiped them away with her hair. You gave me no kiss, but she has been covering my feet with kisses ever since I came in. You did not anoint my head with oil, but she has anointed my feet with ointment. For this reason, I tell you that her sins, many as they are, have been forgiven her, because she has shown such great love. It is someone who's forgiven little who shows little love. And he said to her, your sins are forgiven. Those who were with him at table began to say to themselves, who's this man who even forgives sins? But he said to the woman, your faith has saved you. Go in peace. This text is much, much more than a question about be nice to the people on the margins. Because there's nothing new in that. It's good. It's a fine beginning. But there's nothing new in it. So one of the Pharisees invited Jesus to a meal. We don't have the motivation of the Pharisee in inviting Jesus to that meal. Maybe there was a hypocritical motivation, maybe not. Maybe there was like all of us, mixed motivation. He arrives and he takes his place. And suddenly this woman comes in. We don't know how she heard of him, how she heard that he was there, or how she heard his reputation, or what imagination it was that caused her to think, if I go there, I'm likely to receive an unwelcome from the host, but a welcome from the guest. Somehow her actions demonstrate that she expected something other than hostility, because she came to be generous. So she waits behind him at his feet. It is helpful to think about this. If it was two seats, and there was a table in the middle, and she's behind him at his feet, but weeping and covering his feet with kisses, she was a woman of exceptional length of neck and arms and particularly long hair. So she'd have been kind of towering over him like a banshee. They would have been lounging, leaning on their left hand, for reasons that you can ask your neighbor about later on, leaning on their left hand with their legs out, and the figs and the pomegranates and whatever else they were eating were in between. So kind of lounging on the ground or on a kind of a settee with a low raised table in between them. So in that way, she's behind him. If you can imagine me like this, she's behind him like that. And Simon the Pharisee is the other way. So she's behind him here. Simon the Pharisee, if you know, doesn't judge her in the moment, because she's already judged. He judges Jesus. He judges the association. The question of judging her has been achieved a long time ago. He looks at Jesus and he says, if this man knew who she was, clearly he knows who she is, he would not allow this to happen, because he'd know who she is, what kind of a name she has, and what bad reputation she has in the town. So the question of her, she is a pawn within his moral vision. His hermeneutic is absolutely built on the fact that there is no possibility of moral action from this character. Absolutely none. And everything she does, who she is, her name, her reputation, and your name is everything. And Jesus tells his little parable, Simon, I have something to say to you. And in the parable, you're forgiven and you love in response to forgiveness. Whether you're forgiven much or forgiven little, and you love much if you're forgiven much. And then there is the text, the line that is, in my mind, central to this text. Verse 44. If you imagine, picture them lounging the way they were. He turns to the woman and he says to Simon, he turns his head to his host. Now, I have a friend, Elias, who lives in number 2 Nativity Street, Bethlehem. That's his address. I'm not joking. Next door to Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. You can write to him. He's a joy. And I said to him, I visited him, and I said to him, if I was to deliberately turn my head away from your parents and then speak to them, what would happen? And he laughed, and he said, my parents would be in the complicated situation of needing to try to kick you out because you've offended their honor, and at the same time not betray the fact that they as hosts have to treat you with dignity no matter how undignified you are. So he said, I'm not sure how they'd respond, but it wouldn't be good. Here we see Jesus of Nazareth, the little Lord Jesus, no crying he makes, gentle Jesus, meek and mild, insulting his host by turning his head. And the question he says is the following: do you see this woman? And the answer is no, of course he doesn't. He sees his judgment. He has a hermeneutic, a lens and another lens and another lens and another lens that says she is just a pawn in deciding who she contaminates by association. He doesn't see her at all. He sees his judgment. And not only, he doesn't even see his judgment, he sees what he sees to be true. And Jesus says, do you see this woman? I came to your house and you poured no water over my feet, but she's poured out her tears over my feet and wiped them away with her hair. You gave me no kiss, but she's been covering my feet with kisses ever since I came in. You did not anoint my head with oil, but she has anointed my feet with ointment. He refers to her lips, her hands, her tears, her hair. If we are to take it that the gentle Luke is very subtly trying to imply that this woman works in prostitution, how many people today would be able to refer to the lips of a woman who works in the sex industry with dignity? Where have her lips been? Or her touch? Or the items that she may have procured either from money she got from her clients or in order to procure more clients? The ointment, her smell. Jesus' vision toward her is to see far beyond the things that people use to decipher her. Far beyond. His hermeneutic goes deeper than a dignity, even than she knows, I believe. And the question is, who is it that you do not see? Who is it that you will not see? Who is it for whom you have words that are unexamined? And you have rules around rules for the words that are unexamined. Here's why I don't need to think about the question of their dignity. I'll think about their dignity when they change. You know what it's like. We are all capable of it. It doesn't matter how oppressed we've been, we're perfectly capable of passing it on to somebody else. And the gospel continually challenges the level of our sense of belonging by violent belonging, because it's almost indigenous to us. I've got 2 poems for you. They're called Day of the Dead and Day of the Living. Day of the Dead. After the priest said, "You shouldn't be here at this time of day," I looked at his face for any trace of shame at chasing the desperate from the raw regions of prayer. And I said, "What is your name?" And he said, "I am Legion." And I said, "Are you one or many?" And he said, "Yes. Place your bets on this, boyo. You do not belong. You do not belong. You will not belong. It will not be long before you long for anonymity." I gathered my belongings and left the place of prayer, thinking I shouldn't have gone there in the first place, thinking there was nobody there with a kind face, thinking there was nobody there. Day of the Living. She entered a room full of the deviant queers. Everything from her ears to feet were burning. She looked around the slew of sinners, and everything that was in her said, "Just leave." And she heard all the years of teaching that participation in this kind of congregation is a degradation, a journey away from salvation. And she sat on a plain brown chair. She sat, twisted her hat in nervous fingers, and she sat even though her history was screaming at her, "Leave, leave, leave now, leave quickly, leave, leave." And at the introduction, she breathed when it came to be her turn to say her name. She breathed and she said, "This is my first time in a room of us." She breathed. Day of the Living. A few years ago, one of our governmental ministers in the assembly in Belfast, in response to the almost fatal beating up of a young gay boy who was 19 or 20, he was in hospital. It was the morning after. He didn't die, thank God. But in response to that, she phoned up the local BBC radio station to give a comment. She said, it's terrible that this boy's almost dying, but he is an abomination. And I know a lovely psychiatrist who can help him. A friend of mine who is very senior in the civil service saw this governmental minister later on, and he went up to her and he said, as a gay man and as a Christian man, and just as a human being, I suppose I want to say to you that your words were limited. And she said, yes, but are you a practicing homosexual? And he said, not often enough. And here is the irony, the kind of irony that Alanis Morissette could pay attention to the next time she writes a song. Because rain on your wedding day isn't irony, it's just unfortunate. Or bad planning. This is irony. People who say to us, you gay people shouldn't define yourselves by your sexuality, are often the ones then who define us by our sexuality themselves, by their erotic imagination of what our sex lives are like. Would that they were so juicy. By their erotic imagination about what it means to be having a bisexual breakfast or a lesbian lunch or transgender tea or intersex interviews. As Justin said last night, this right here is practicing homosexuality, defining the terms that I wish to be spoken about and with and to and by, navigating dignity in my own life, rather than allowing somebody who will not see me to use words about me that suit their reading rather than my reading. This is what practicing homosexuality is like. It is people living with hostility when we are accused of being hostile. It is having to convince people who want to speak about us that we should be included in the conversation about us. It is having to be 10 times more gracious in order to be considered marginally worthy of participation in a conversation. It is living in a world where we must learn to survive exclusion at an early age or suffer the consequences. But we suffer the consequences anyway. It is having a hope for the glory of the world. It is not being hostile to those who show us hostility. It is believing that anybody who shows hostility, including ourselves, must learn a deeper sense of ourselves. And we too must learn this. It is knowing that the healing power of touch may be accompanied by the injuring power of labeling. It is people who know that to hold the hand of your partner in public is likely to make others feel that it is acceptable to damage you. It is hearing questions about your genitals from folks who've never questioned their genitals. It is learning to tolerate being tolerated, even though we have a dream that we are more than tolerable. It is hearing people discuss whether or not we should be included based on their reading of the Bible. It is accepting that church structures that proclaim life and flourishing seek and are often given protection from the law when they deny us our flourishing. It is, amidst the sometimes overpowering heteronormativity we have experienced, finding love, life, flourishing, and hope from the deepest part of our own selves. Practicing a homosexuality is to have faced down the consequence of being merely tolerated and find a way of living life and community with ourselves and with others. Practicing homosexuality is knowing that inasmuch as we have suffered, we must be careful not to cause suffering. Practicing homosexuality is discovering the richness that comes from moving away from narrow binaries. We do not need to register surprise at someone who chooses how to live with and express their gender identity. Practicing homosexuality is knowing that society flourishes when we can find richness in diversity. Practicing homosexuality is not being afraid of difference. It is not trying to be the same. It is not being afraid. This is what practicing homosexuality looks like. And the gates of hell will not prevail against it. Here are some stories about evangelicals. A few years ago at the Corrymeela Centre for Peace and Reconciliation on the north coast of Ireland, I held a symposium for 2 days, 45 people, LGBT advocates, clergy, people with all kinds of readings of the dignity or not of LGBT lives, stories, and loves. And the person who started off first, we had people who disagreed with each other deliberately. The person who started off first said, "The first thing that we must know about people who choose the homosexual lifestyle is," I went on, and somebody goes, "I hate fundamentalist evangelicals." And it was a fabulous beginning, because what we had was people using their words about each other, for each other, with each other. And the wisdom we came up with was, it is always a good idea, no matter what perspective you come from, to find out, how does an individual refer to themselves? We know this amongst ourselves, but sometimes we don't extend this to people who are our detractors. It does nobody any good to refer to people as rabid fundamentalists. Like, what individual is going to wake up in the morning and go, "Today my lifestyle choice is to be a rabid fundamentalist"? So I find out, what words do people wish for themselves, and use that for them, even if it hurts me. But I expect them to do the same, and I hold them to the same level of integrity, of naming, that I hold myself to. At another engagement of clergy and LGBT people, we'd had 2 rich, wonderful, warm days of speaking about each other, using our words about each other, holding the gaze of each other. And at the end of it, one man who had chosen the word fundamentalist when he described himself said, "I have a question for the gay people in the room." And he said, "It is an honest question, and I want you to answer it honestly." He said, "Since we met yesterday, how many times have my words bruised you?" Now, we're all kind of nice, polite Irish people in the room, and all the gay people in the room are like, "Ah, you're lovely, you're fine." And he went, "No, this is serious. How many times?" And the fellow next to me went, "I gave up after the first session." And the man was mortified. And I have been changed by that man's courage to examine the edges of his own story, to ask himself the question that those on the other side of the opinion would most wish that he'd ask. And it was much more fruitful that he asked himself that than I was forcing my question on him. So it isn't just about being nice to feel good. It is about creating an environment of inclusion, acceptance, and absolutely deep integrity, in order that we can ask ourselves the most difficult question and face the truth of those most difficult questions. This is what the purpose of dialogue is. Not to feel good, because you won't feel good. You'll feel bloody exhausted after this. And you'll only stay in if the outcome is high for everybody. An evangelical woman came up to me after a public engagement I had and said, "I would hate for my relationship," she was married to a man, she goes, "I would hate for my marriage to be spoken about in the way that I speak about your relationship." And I thought, she is a brave woman. She is saying something important, and it is important that she's saying it. I've said a few times that LGBT people are perfectly capable of passing on the hate in the same way that we've received it. Anything that says that we're more naturally inclined to be inclusive is a nice idea. There's a prayer group back home that is for gay men, and I never went because I thought, surely be to God, why do we have a prayer group just for gay men? Like, there's few enough places of LGBT inclusion, faith spaces, so I didn't see why women weren't involved. Anyway, a friend of mine wanted to go. He wanted to join, and he said, "I can't go myself. For God's sake, would you come along with me? At least once. Just come along so that I can go there and not be alone." So, Grant, I'll come along once. And I happened to go along the first night that they were discussing, will we or won't we allow the lesbians to join us? And somebody said, "I've never met a lesbian. What are they like? What do they do? I wonder if we could invite one to come and speak to us about them." And I started to take notes for the poem I'm about to read you, and was delighted that I'd gone along, and thought, if one was to write to the Department of Lesbianism, to whom should one address the letter? What would her title be? And this poem is called The Visit of the Queen of the Lesbians to the Prayer Group of Men Who Happen to Be Gay. And I know that the lesbians in the room are going, listen, buddy, of all the titles that the chief lesbian would choose, you can be guaranteed she wouldn't choose Queen. But the poem is published, and Queen is there. The visit of the Queen of the Lesbians to the prayer group of men who happen to be gay. When she came to visit, she said, "Don't ask me. I'm just the driver." When she came to visit, she said, "Questions reveal much about the secrets of the questioner." When she came to visit, she said, "Ask a better question, lads." She said, "Misogyny is no respecter of your homo-androcentric little whirlwinds." When she came to visit, she said, "Just because you don't want to screw us doesn't mean you don't screw us. So don't ask me to visit you. Answer your own queries. When she came to visit, she said, "Cook for us instead." That's what the Queen of the Lesbians said. What I'm trying to say is that there is something about trespassing on the integrity of your own indigenous story. A story where you will find God. And if your story is hellish, you'll find God there, weeping among the bedraggled parts of your own biography, believing that there is something deeper than the bedraggled biography that you tell yourself about yourself. Hell is ravaged. That is the story of incarnation. And hell exists around us. If we believe in heaven and earth, we know, and the 20th century has told us, that there is hell on earth. And if we believe in the incarnation, we must believe in the full incarnation, in body, in soul, in flourishing, and in ravaging. And the story of the incarnation is demonstrated to us over and over and over again by the interpersonal dynamics of Jesus of Nazareth in the biblical text. He even knew how to question his own stories. There's a text that I was going to look at in detail, but we're not, because I'm talking too much. In Mark chapter 7, Jesus has gone to Gentile territory, and he seems to wish to be alone. He's gone into this territory, and he's gone into a home, and he's there, and this woman comes begging, throwing herself at his feet for the life of her daughter. "There is a devil in my daughter," she says to him. Such beautiful alliteration in English. A devil in my daughter, even though the story itself isn't beautiful. And Jesus says to her, "You don't take the crumbs from the table and give them to the little dogs." Now, I know some people who are so determined to only ever read Jesus of Nazareth in his meek and mild way because it says little dogs. They go, "That's a puppy." He's not calling the woman a bitch. He's calling her a puppy. But she says, "Oh, sir, even the little dogs eat the little crumbs." She doubles the diminutive. She introduces a diminutive in the little crumbs. She says, "Call me what you want, sir, but I believe that I've got something to say. Call me what you want. You want to call me a bitch? I'll say this bitch is worthy of a crumb, a little crumb." And Jesus honors her with words that are not given to anybody in the gospel. Nobody else, woman or man, is given the words of her. He says to her, "Because of what you have said, you may go. The devil is gone from your daughter." But I think the one who was converted was the man himself, the lake walker. He was brought into a larger understanding of the edges of the way he saw things by this woman who wouldn't put up with his words for her. And she said, I'll use your words from me about myself, but it's okay. I'm more comfortable with my words about myself than you are, because your words say a lot about you. So listen to your words, and listen to me heap insult upon insult and still believe in myself. And I believe that there was a changing of mind in Jesus of Nazareth. And this is a story we must tell about ourselves. This should be part of our liturgy, that we recognize in our liturgy that the incarnation was so full that God saw it fit, that the incarnation of God in human form within the Christian story would say, let me incarnate where the story is rough and edgy so that people can learn. And this is what we must do. We must learn when our words are wrong. And we must often learn when our words are wrong, when we use them about somebody in front of us, somebody who we can see or not see. And they say back to us, this is who I say I am. And if you're good, and if you're holy, and if you're human, you will listen. This is the vivacity of the incarnation that we have in the Christian tradition. And we see the vivacity of that story within all the faith traditions and within all the humanist ways of understanding ourselves. I don't think anybody can colonize the dignity of this into their own faith tradition. My mother lived through a long and difficult period of her life, a very long and very difficult period of severe depression. And years later, 2 miscarriages and 3 more children later, she was still under the heavy, damp blanket of this. And she was lying in bed in the afternoon, and she woke up because a strange woman had walked into the room. A woman around 70 years old, curly hair, utterly normal. And my mother knew immediately, this is Mary, the Mother of God. And she said, my mum said, I felt the depression on the mattress when Mary sat down. And Mary looked at her and said, you never liked me much, did you? And my mother, with the fluency of comprehension that she doesn't often exhibit, said to her, no. And Mary said, that's okay. That's okay. And my little brother trotted into the room. He was 4 years old. My mum turned her head to look at my brother, turned away, and the star of the sea was gone. And this story, I think, is one of the most beautiful stories of the gospel that I've ever heard in my life. Because it says to us, no matter what lonely corner of hell we think is normal for us, God will find a way to inhabit it without judgment, without blame, without aggression, wandering in as if he was always there, telling us our story deeper than we know ourselves, and saying to us, that's okay. Sitting on the mattress, helping us feel in our own body the dignity of us being accompanied right where we are, of our story already being known, and the telling of our story is only so that we can believe that there might be something deeper than the bedraggled story about ourselves that we tell. This is the story of faith. This is the story of who do you say that I am? It is pointing to the idea that there is always something deeper than the damaged ways we speak about ourselves. And perhaps the first person who needs to believe that is us. And then we need to extend that integrity wider. Jesus of Nazareth is good news. This news of who do you say that I am is good news. It is important for us. It removes us from an addiction to certainty, an addiction that if I join the right group, everything will be okay. If I join the right group, I'll have the answers to the problems of the world. I'll have a clear and straightforward vision about what things were, what they are, and what they will be. And we have never had that. Faith has never been about that. I'll finish with a poem called The Facts of Life. I was writing my master's last year and reading a commentary on the Gospel of Mark, and it was a fantastic commentary. astonishing, absolutely brilliant. And I looked at the back to think, what else have the publishers published? Because I'd be interested in looking up. And they had a commentary on the Gospel of Matthew, a commentary on the book of Revelation, a commentary on the letter to the Hebrews, a commentary on the facts of life, a commentary on 1st and 2nd Corinthians, commentary on Romans. I was thinking, what a curious little thing to slip in the midst of it. A commentary on the facts of life. And what on earth is a commentary on the facts of life? Anyway, it got me thinking about, well, what are the facts of life? And so I'll end my words to you with this poem, and I end using this as a benediction for all of us. In the places where we have been colonized and excluded and bedraggled, and in the places where we have passed that on to others, in the places where we have not seen the individual but seen our judgment, this is a blessing for all of us to move more generously into the life of dignity and integrity. The facts of life. That you were born and you will die. That you will sometimes love enough and sometimes not. That you will lie, if only to yourself. That you will get tired. That you will learn most from the situations you did not choose. That there will be some things that move you more than you can say. That you will live. That you must be loved. That you will avoid questions most urgently in need of your attention. That you began as the fusion of a sperm and an egg of two people who once were strangers and may well still be. That life isn't fair. That life is sometimes good and sometimes even better than good. That life is often not so good. That life is real. And if you can survive it, well, survive it well, with love and art and meaning given where meaning is scarce. That you will learn to live with respect. That you will learn to live with regret. That the structures that constrict you may not be permanently constricting. That you will probably be okay. That you must accept change or die, and you'll die anyway. So you might as well live. And you might as well love. You might as well love. You might as well love.